Siwash, upon reaching the beach without hesitation, engaged the enemy in fierce combat, namely one rooster of Japanese ancestry. That was a commendation for Sergeant Siwash. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. Yeah, you heard that right. We're going to talk about somebody that got into a fight with a Japanese rooster during World War II. But since you've already clicked on the episode title, it's not what you think. We are going to talk about some of the craziest animals that have ever seen service in the military, with a weird theme to it, actually. It definitely feels like all of these guys were enlisted with the help of alcohol at some point in time. But what do you expect when two stories involve the Marine Corps? I mean, don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people that are Marines or are, they'll tell you there's no such thing as a former Marine, retired Marines. And most of them wouldn't disagree that, like, yeah, some of these decisions sound about right for the Marine Corps. But anyway, we are going to start off with probably the biggest guest on this episode. It's 1943. The Polish Second Corps has been rebuilt, and they had to rebuild because they went through an absolute nightmare of a journey. They started off being captured and sent to a Soviet labor camp, which, they escaped there. They traveled through Iraq and Palestine. And at the time of our story beginning, they're moving through the mountains of Iran when a group of soldiers find a young Iranian boy at a market. And he has something very, very interesting for sale. So, depending on what side of this trade you're looking at, this is either the best or worst trade in the history of commerce. Because this boy acquires some food and a neat Polish penknife. And these soldiers have just acquired a cat-sized Syrian brown bear. And because you can't just have a bear, you can't just have a pet and not name it, they went ahead and named him Wojtek. He was officially adopted by the 22nd Artillery Supply Company and raised on condensed milk from an old vodka bottle, which is possibly the most Polish sentence I've ever said. I mean, let's be real here. That's the same way Jan Sobieski was raised from our Jan Sobieski episode, who looked like an old-timey defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. That was a man whose diet was strictly beer, cabbage, sausage, and hatred. And if you haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to it. I had my friends David and Sarah from the Macabre Emporium podcast on with me, and Jan Sobieski was a bad... So, Wojtek slept in the tents with the soldiers, and because he has to be able to pull his own weight, they're not just going to have him as like a hanger-on. He learned how to carry ammunition crates. He watched the men and kind of did what they were doing, which meant that he also learned how to smoke cigarettes and drink beer. And at one point in time, apparently decided that all of these other strange-looking bears are going into this room and they're coming out and there's water. So I should go in there and see where the water's coming from. That was his first trip to the shower. And he apparently enjoyed it to the point that a couple of times while they were traveling through Italy, they ran out of water because he would sneak in there when there was nobody around and turn the showers on and just hang out in the shower. Because, spoiler alert, bears like water for the most part. He also found himself wrestling with his fellow soldiers pretty frequently, and he won because, I mean, he's a bear. But he was fairly polite about it. There was never any hard feelings or, harsh words thrown around. Which brings us to the actual funny shower incident that I wanted to talk about. So one night, I'm assuming after everybody is like in the rack for the night, he has decided that now is a good time to go waste all of the water and take a giant bear shower. So he goes in there and he doesn't find just like bars of soap and towels. He finds a German spy. And depending on the account, it was either a spy or a saboteur. This guy had infiltrated the camp and decided that the shower block, being a fairly good-sized building and dark, it's probably a good place to hide to figure out the next move as to where to go from here. Unfortunately for our German friend, the shower was not empty. It was full of Wojtek. So, could you imagine the moment that you're just like, okay, I got all this intel. Maybe I'm going to plant some charges. I'm going to go in here and wait just in case anybody's poking around so I can find out what I'm going to do next. You walk in and there's a son of a bitchin' giant brown bear in there. You would your entire uniform. What happened to you? I my shirt, sir. So obviously this guy is making a little bit of noise. So the Polish soldiers come running and they find him cornered by Wojtek in the shower block in the middle of this Italian military camp. And by all accounts, he was not physically harmed by the bear or by the captors. He did, however, need fresh underwear. I am almost positive of that. So he's detained and handed over to the, relevant authorities, and he most likely spent the rest of the war in captivity, grateful that the bear had been in a decent mood and probably just thought that this is a new guy to wrestle with in the shower. Highly recommend not Googling bears wrestling in the shower. Not that I did that, but I know exactly what will happen if you do. But since this guy is taken to an Allied prisoner camp, he was most likely treated pretty well, considering German prisoners in the possession of American or British troops had about a 95% survival rate. Which isn't bad. That's pretty good. Those guys that were lucky enough to get snagged by the Russians had a sizably lower survivability rate. And then we're not even going to talk about, on this episode at least, the 20 to 27% survival rate of American troops captured by the Japanese. Because, spoiler alert, the Japanese were dickheads in World War II. It's going to happen next season, I promise. I was going to do something this season, but I just kind of ran out of time. But I got a real bad one planned. So I'll warn you when that's happening. You might want to skip that one. It's going to be graphic. So being a bear, Wojtek didn't receive any commendation for this. He honestly probably didn't know that he'd done anything good. He probably just went back to drinking beer and eating cigarettes like he'd been before. So to be fully transparent, because you guys know I'm not going to anybody here, the spy stories is one of the parts of this whole tale with Wojtek that gets passed around a lot, and there's kind of thin sourcing on it. It could be completely true. It may be partially made up. There's no way to tell because everybody that was there that could give you a first-hand account is dead. Spoiler alert, including Wojtek, because again, he's a bear. So this could have been something that started off as, you get the telephone game, and then over 50 years of telling stories and, swapping tales back and forth, it may have been blown out of proportion. I personally choose to believe that it happened exactly as I described it, with this, I'm not going to say poor German spy, cornered in a shower, pooping in his shorts because there's a bear in there. But that part of the story makes the most sense for Wojtek's whole deal. If I'm wrong, obviously, let me know. If you find a source that proves that that's not correct, let me know. I will correct myself, obviously. Until then, there was a spy in the shower, and he had a very bad night because Wojtek found him. When the Corps arrived in Egypt and the British authorities saw the bear, they decided he can't travel on a military transport because he is not on the roster. He's technically a mascot, so we can't have him on here. But the Polish, being good soldiers, are not about to leave somebody behind. They legally enlisted him in the Polish army. He became Private Wojtek, 22nd Artillery Supply Company, Polish 2nd Corps. He had a full pay roster. He had rations assigned to him, which he received in the form of dried fruit, cigarettes, which he didn't actually smoke. He just kind of chewed on them, and beer, which he absolutely did drink. There's a crazy thing with animals. They love beer, especially like bears are pretty particular with it, and so are pigs. There was a story, I believe it was in Australia a few years ago. The headline was like, wild boar breaks into camp, drinks 36 beers, and passes out in tent. And I'm like, same. But I've never gotten an animal drunk. I think it's technically animal abuse if you do it intentionally. Would it be funny, though? Yes. Especially if it was... I think a bear would be pretty funny to get drunk. And now that I'm thinking about it, yeah, the pig would be cool, too. We need to get a moose drunk. That'd be fun. He'd just stumble around all over the place. So now that the British have actual paperwork for this bear, they have no choice but to let him on the transport ship. They're off to Italy, and they are headed to one of the bloodiest and most brutal engagements in the entire Italian campaign. Wojtek is headed to Monte Cassino, which could be its own episode at some point because that was nasty. So just kind of a quick overview. It was a German defensive line built into a mountain, like a series of like monasteries in the mountains. And the Allies just constantly, one after the other, attacked this place. And there was a huge, huge loss of life, including, if you've watched Band of Brothers, Bill Garnier's brother died at Monte Cassino. And he got the letter just before they jumped on D-Day. I think it was like 2 days before that or something. Because that's when you have that whole scene where they ambush the Germans with a horse cart and they shoot all of them. And then Bill climbs down and just dumps another stick magazine into this one guy. And Captain Winters is like, what the hell is your problem? And he just got news that his brother died in Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino. Oh, God. I have to go watch Band of Brothers again. I have to watch back through it again. During this particular battle, Wojtek was watching soldiers carrying artillery shells and crates of ammunition from the supply trucks to the guns. And then he's just like, okay, cool. These other bears are doing this. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. So he just goes over and snags a crate and carries it off. He did this the entire time they were shelling Monte Cassino. Back and forth, crate after crate. He apparently never dropped a crate of ammunition. I don't know exactly how he was carrying it, if he was grabbing it by like the hemp handle on the thing and with his mouth and carrying it off, because I don't think bears can rotate their wrist. ADD break. Okay, so bears, and I'm apparently not the first person to ask this question because I was on Google and I said, can bears row, R-O, and then it immediately auto-populated rotate their wrists. So yes, bears can rotate their wrists and forearms, meaning there is every possibility that this bear was scooping wooden crates up like you would and carrying them to the artillery guns. Huh. Okay, anyway, let's get back to it here. So after the Battle of Monte Cassino, the Polish 2nd Corps made him their official mascot and emblem. And I love this so much. Their unit patch for the 22nd Artillery Supply Chain to this day is an image of a bear carrying an artillery shell, and I will put it right there. After the war comes to an end, spoiler alert, the Polish were on the winning side of that, just in case we're not familiar. It doesn't feel like they were, because they kind of got it coming and going, if you know what I mean. They got hit from both sides during World War II. And then arguably got it worse after World War II when the Soviets were just like, this is nice. I stay here now. And they just kind of hung out there until I don't know, 1970 something. Just making it miserable to be Polish. But after the war ends, Wojtek went to Scotland with the Polish soldiers who couldn't go home because, again, Stalin has taken Poland. And going home meant going to a Soviet labor camp, or even worse, because you were in the military, and they don't want people like that out on the loose because you could potentially foment resistance to the ruling class. And we can't be having that. It's almost like maybe that's why they classify veterans as mentally ill so much so that they can take their guns away here in case anything were to happen. Anyway, he lived at the Edinburgh Zoo, where veterans of the Second Corps would visit him pretty regularly. They would climb into his enclosure and wrestle with him the way that they had in the desert. And he remembered all of these guys. So one of them would just be walking through and he'd walk by and he would get super excited because he's like, I remember this dude. Wojtek would pass away in 1963 at the Edinburgh Zoo, somewhere around the age of 21 or 22 years old, which is a pretty good run from what I could find for a bear. There are statues of him in Edinburgh. There's a statue of him in London. There's a statue of him in Krakow, Poland, because the country that he fought for finally got to claim him back. He obviously never fired a weapon in anger, never got a chance to physically fight in combat, but he pulled his own weight because he was helping to feed the artillery. Man, I love this guy. This is one of my favorite animals of all time. Now, the next one is one that I think is going to be just as popular, just as familiar to a lot of people. May 1941, from the mist, a ship is taking form, and the silence of the sea is about to drift into the storm. Somebody will appreciate that. The German battleship Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, the most feared warship in the Atlantic, a ship so formidable that the Brits sent essentially everything they had to sink it, is on its maiden operational voyage. Oscar the cat is aboard. Nobody knows exactly how he got there, or who fed him, or what his general feelings were about potentially the Nazi Party or anything. I will tell you, if anybody can find proof that he was a member of the Nazi Party, I will go back and delete this part of the episode for future consumption. Because the last thing we need to do is talk about Nazi cats. God, he'd be adorable in that uniform, though. Just a little orange cat with a snappy black trench coat and a little hat with the death's head on it. I'm going to see if I can get banned from AI. So something to keep in mind here is cats are generally considered to be kind of a good luck charm for seafaring folks. And that's what we in the business call foreshadowing. On May 27th, 1941, the Royal Navy caught the Bismarck and created the most over-engineered fish tank decoration that the fatherland has ever put forward. Because if there's one thing that the Germans did and do to this day, is over-engineer every piece of machinery on a vehicle that they can. Don't buy German-made cars. Yeah, they're nice, but holy Jesus. When you have to take 6 parts of a skid plate off to do an oil change, what's the point? You need an Allen wrench to take your lug nuts off? What's the point? Then you contact Porsche to see about trying to get parts for a Panzer, and they never get back to you. That's terrible customer service, by the way. Just saying. During this little incident, over 2,000 German sailors died in the water. The British destroyer, the HMS Cossack, pulled a few survivors out of the water, including Oscar, who they found floating on a board amid the wreckage. I'm wondering, I would dare guess that there was probably enough room on that board for Jack, but he would have just knocked him off the edge like a glass anyway, because, cats are going to be cats. The sailors that pulled Oscar out of the water described him as, quote, angry and unharmed, which is, the correct response to your home being sunk. I get that. I respect it. The British sailors adopted him. They named him Oscar, and they brought him aboard. So before that, we don't even know what his name was. 3 months later, the HMS Cossack is off the coast of Gibraltar when it's broadsided by a German torpedo. The ship is severely damaged because, torpedo. They lost over 100 men, and it was eventually towed to Gibraltar, where it'd be deemed unsalvageable and decommissioned. Meaning, we can't fix this boat, so now we are essentially scrapping it. Which is good, in a way, because this is pretty early in the war. Having scrap metal is going to be pretty important, because you can send a lot of that back to shipyards to make repairs and upgrades to other ships. You can send that back and make, 500 billion stens, because they cost like $12 a piece to make, and they were just like stamped sheet metal, basically like a caulking gun, which I love the sten. But being left-handed, I can't actually operate it because it would knock my teeth out, because it's a gas blowback and I would get hit in the mouth, which sucks. I guess I could shoot one right-handed. What I'm getting at is I want a sten, okay? Oscar is found on the dockside after the rescue operations. The official account, quote, unhurt and clearly distressed. Again, correct response. The Navy at this point had a cat who had survived 2 sinking ships and has been described as distressed about it both times. And their conclusion was to naturally put him on another ship. They transferred him to the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, which is one of the most famous ships in the Royal Navy, and had entirely coincidentally been involved in the hunt that sank the Bismarck in the first place. Small world. We've come full circle-ish. 14 days later, after setting foot on the Ark Royal, a German submarine torpedoed the Ark Royal. It sunk very slowly, slowly enough that most of the crew survived. Oscar was found the following morning, floating on a floating board in the Mediterranean, alive, furious, unhurt. Because believe it or not, cats, I don't think are a big fan of water, unless you have a weird one. I think orange cats are probably like pretty cool with it. Every orange cat that I've had has been, what's the medical term I'm looking for? Stupid. And they've enjoyed being in the tub. But I think I've actually mentioned it with David before in conversations that, like, I'm pretty sure there's like 12 brain cells. I think this is like a working theory that we've come up with. There's like 12 brain cells that have to be shared amongst all orange cats. So they get them for a very short period of time where they can have like a little bit of like, I'm intelligent. No, I'm a derp again. So again, he's rescued and described as angry, which, yes, you would be. You've had 3 ships shot at from underneath you at this point. 2 of them are sunk by the same Navy, and then they keep putting you on new ones. The math is not mathing here for this poor cat. Whoever did this deserved a promotion. They officially, on his paperwork, renamed him Unsinkable Sam, which is either the cutest thing ever or the most passive-aggressively British thing ever, or somehow both at the same time. They also concluded that maybe, because again, sailors and seafaring folk, very superstitious. They're probably starting to think that maybe putting this cat on another active warship, not the best idea for him or like their bottom line in the war when it comes to saving money and losing ships. And they transferred him to land duties. He spent a lot of time at the Governor General's office in Gibraltar, then at the Home for Sailors in Belfast, which, being a loyalist Protestant cat in Belfast, could have been very dangerous all on its own. Because I'm assuming, again, he's English, so this cat is clearly a Protestant, meaning that in my headcanon, there would be Catholic cats, right? And being in Belfast at this period in time means that the Protestant cat is somewhere he shouldn't be. He's colonizing. And there may or may not, somewhere in the back of my head, be a cat IRA. Little balaclavas and little AR-18s. Little cats, just like animated cats walking around with AR-18s and singing IRA songs. This is why I'm not on the board at Disney, because you ever seen that movie, The Aristocats? Now give the big orange one a balaclava and a rifle. God, I love this idea. This is why I'm not allowed to have money. Because I would just make inappropriate cartoons. So after this, he would eventually retire to the UK proper, where he belongs. And go on home, British house cat, go on home. Have you got no home of your own? Unsinkable Sam would finally meet his fate in 1955 on land in a building like a normal cat who just simply decided to stop being involved with naval warfare and pass away at a reasonable age. So again, same kind of disclaimer as with the last story. There could potentially be a lot of holes in the Unsinkable Sam story. It does appear in like several books, but the modern naval records really don't mention anything about him by name. And a lot of people think that there's potential that none of this actually even happened and this was all just made up and just attributed to a random cat that they saw. That doesn't hold water with me, like most of these ships that he was on, because there's too much, like, too many details. There is, however, a painting that was done after the war that's titled The Able Sea Cat Oscar, which is either actual evidence that he was a thing, or it's proof that somebody really wanted him to have been a thing. Again, I choose to believe that I've told you all of the truth here, because I don't want to lie about this. But something about animals being in combat, things get blown out of proportion, stories get told. But like I said, as far as I know, this is true. So we're going to leave it that way. Because I want to believe that the Brits sunk the Bismarck and somehow came back with a cat as a trophy. And then Poseidon was like, nah, that cat's mine. And I need him back. And every ship that they put him on after that got sunk, and they still kept the cat alive somehow. Oh, God. Now let's move on to 1952. This is a topic I haven't really... Actually, I don't think I've touched on at all on this show so far, is the Korean War. Other than maybe a little bit with Williams... with Cersei a few episodes back. The Korean War is grinding its way through the ugly middle parts. It's the kind of war where the line moves back and forth across the same ridges and mountaintops for months, and people are dying for no reason over hills that are numbered and not even named. They fight for a hill. They die for a hill. Then they abandon it a week later. Have I mentioned that war is stupid yet on here? I think so. I'm going to say it again. War's dumb. And again, I didn't start this show to be like, war good. No. War justifiable? Sometime? Yes. War good? No. War no good. Man die, war. War bad. The 5th Marine Regiment is operating in an area around something called the Jamestown Line, and they're running a weapon system, which is the 75mm recoilless rifle, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a giant rifle that doesn't recoil. It fires a 75mm shell and is super effective at destroying things on the other side of it. The problem is the ammunition that they need. Each round weighs about 75 pounds. And getting those from the supply point to the gun emplacements up these like super steep hillsides while you're getting shot at in Korea, it's literally killing the men that are trying to do it. So they need something better. They need a better system as to how to get these shells up the hill. Something stronger than the man. Something that was maybe designed to haul heavy things. That's where Lieutenant Eric Peterson finds the perfect solution. He's not the solution. He goes to a racetrack, specifically the Shinjuju racetrack in Seoul, South Korea, which he comes across a beautiful young horse named Flame that's being sold by a Korean stable boy with just the most unfortunately Korean name ever, Kim Hook Moon. He kind of needs money to buy his sister an artificial leg. Because again, it's a war zone, and war sucks balls. And sometimes kids get hurt in war. Especially like Korea with landmines and whatnot. Which I honestly, personally think you can look at all the chemical weapons and nuclear weapons that we've developed as a species, as just hairless apes finding different ways to kill each other. I personally think the most destructive thing we've ever created for war is landmines. They don't give a who you are or what you're doing there. They are taking something away from you. They don't need to be aimed like a rifle or a bomb where you have to figure out where to drop it and the trajectory and all this stuff. You chuck it in the ground and you walk away. And then somebody finds it. And a lot of the time, the somebody that finds it is someone who's not even involved with what you're doing in the first place. And a lot of the time, it's kids. And there's, what's the name of it? So I had to look it up because there's a few. You have the ICBL, CMC, the Halo Trust, and Mines Advisory Group, which are groups that work internationally to go to former war zones and clear landmines so that farmers and kids can stop getting killed 75, 80 years later by landmines that somebody threw in the ground, waiting for somebody else to walk across it to blow them up. Because why would we pick it up? Why bother? There's no point. As Americans, we do the same thing. We leave a war zone. We leave all of our shit there because it costs more to take it back than it would to just make more of it. And what sucks is now you have places like Ukraine where they're using landmines all over the place. So it's either the worst thing ever or it's a conspiracy by big landmine to stay in business. Anyway, rant over. Our buddy Peterson here pays this kid $250 for this horse, which is roughly the cost of a 1911 .45 pistol at the time. And a lot of his fellow Marines didn't let him live down the fact that he could have bought a 1911 instead of a horse. But he brings her back to the regiment, and they rename her Reckless after the recoilless rifle platoon she's about to join. Good news is, our stable boy that sold the horse got to buy his sister a new leg, which is awesome. The Marines got a horse, and Reckless now has a war to fight. Somewhere in horse heaven, her ancestors are smiling down on her because she just so happened to be a Mongolian purebred. And if you're not familiar with how Mongolians used horses, all you need to do is ask about 0.5% of the males on the planet how effective the Mongolians were with horses. Because, yeah, 0.5% of all males on the planet have some kind of genealogy that can be traced back directly to Genghis Khan. And how did Genghis Khan get around, I can hear you asking? Why, on Mongolian horses is how. And this dude was just chucking wiener everywhere he went. Sometimes, I'm guessing against people's will, because that's just kind of how it works with that stuff. Anyway, Reckless learned these routes up the mountains by herself, which that part usually gives people like a little bit of pause to go, I don't know. She wasn't led up and down the hills by the handler on every run. She's shown the route once, maybe twice, up and down, whatever. And then after that, she would do it on her own. Because believe it or not, horses are pretty self-sufficient when it comes to stuff like that. They know where to go to do things and how to get there. You turn a horse loose and it's going to go do its thing and then it's going to come back. It's like a giant dog, except you need to put shoes on it. And I know what you're saying. Yes, there's people that put shoes on dogs. And I feel so bad for those dogs. It's like when somebody puts a sweater on their dog and they take a picture of it and you can see in the dog's face, it's like, just kill me, please, because I shouldn't be in this sweater. So she is making her way from supply point to gun emplacement, loaded up, walking back up, walking up the hill, getting unloaded, walking back down, getting loaded again by herself while she's being shot at. The Marines would load shells onto her and she would walk up to the guns and stand there while they unloaded them. And then as soon as she was unloaded, she'd turn back around and head right back out. No human interaction other than that. She didn't need anybody holding the reins. She's just doing her thing. Just a horse living her best life after she'd figured out the job. March 26, 1953, during the battle for a position called Outpost Vegas, Reckless made 51 ammunition runs in a single day. 51 runs in 5 hours under sustained mortar, artillery, and small arms fire. She covered about 35 miles uphill in terrain in just that one day. She was twice hit by shrapnel. One kind of got her like up under the eye and one in her flank, which is like on her side. Both times she was patched up and went back to work. The Marines that were there said that she didn't even flinch. Like when they were trying to patch her up, just stood there. Didn't care. She's like, all right, cool, let's go. They did say that the only time they ever saw her stop was to like nibble on grass here and there. But again, she's a horse. She's going to do that. But, obviously she has to do that constantly because she's burning calories. But she ate everything. And it's not important for this part of the story, but it is important for the story itself. So Reckless is getting, obviously, her regular grain, grass wherever she can graze. She also gained a taste for eggs, candy bars, beer, Coca-Cola, rice, carrots, and at least one documented occasion, a poker chip. She also ate somebody's entire hat once, which doesn't surprise me for a horse because If it's not nailed down, they're probably going to try to pick it up with their mouth. There was a couple of guys. There was a short documentary I watched where one of the guys that survived this, that was at the guns, he got teary-eyed, and that got me teary-eyed because I am a giant pussy when it comes to watching grown men cry. I don't know why. I'm turning into my father. It's weird. But he said every time that Reckless came up, they were excited to see her. And every time she went back down, they were worried that they weren't ever going to see her again. And they didn't have to worry about that because she always came back up. She never got banged up bad enough that she couldn't continue fighting. But let's get back to some fun stuff here. She would just randomly walk into the mess tent and help herself, and nobody stopped her because she's Reckless and she has earned her food. The Marines fed her beer before the particularly bad days, not because they thought it would help her performance, but because she liked it and she had deserved it and she had earned it. She would sleep in the Marines' tents. She was apparently housebroken, meaning that obviously if she has to go do what horses do, she's going to go outside to do so, not just in a tent, which is pretty impressive and also very convenient because if you've never had to shovel horse poo, there's a lot of it, and there can be a lot of it. The men taught her how to bow, which was kind of cool too. She learned that if she found this one particular rope and pulled on it, it would open the paddock gate, and she would use this sneaky information that she has come across to let herself out at night and just kind of wander around the camp, looking for food or company, somebody to hang out with, which is exactly the kind of initiative that the Marine Corps officials encourage in its personnel. They like you to think outside the box and be creative when you need to be. Now, speaking of being creative when you need to be, the Korean War has come to a close for Reckless and her company. But we're not leaving this particular piece of equipment behind, because this is Sergeant Reckless. She has rank. She is enlisted. She doesn't stay in Korea. The war comes to an end. The Marines are rotated back to the States, and the problem here is the paperwork. The United States military had regulations about transporting animals, and getting a horse through official channels would have taken months of bureaucratic red tape, and nobody has the patience for that. These are Marines, after all. If any of you listening are Marines, I'm joking. I love you guys. And I've also said on here before that I've heard from a few different people, and apparently Marines will definitely agree with this. If you need something dead, broken, or pregnant, you don't call the Army, you call the Marine Corps. So the Marines did what Marines do when regulations get between them and the correct outcome. They smuggled Reckless home. The details of how they did this are a little fuzzy. They kind of depend on who's telling the story. This is another one of those parts where it's been passed around long enough that the specifics have changed here and there. But the broader outline of how the whole thing happened is pretty consistent. Reckless was loaded onto a transport ship with some, don't want to call it forged paperwork, creatively edited paperwork. So now we have a group of Marines who are extremely motivated to make sure that she makes it aboard this ship, and completely uninterested in talking about the finer points of animal importation regulations with anyone, because that might slow the process down. And we're not going to. She crosses the Pacific. She arrives in California. She is now, at this point, the United States Marines problem in the best way possible. There is a story of her going into quarantine because she had to go into quarantine in case she had some kind of weird Korean horse virus or whatever. That is generally just a good idea, to quarantine an animal when it comes in from a different country, because who knows what it might have. There is, at this point, the possibility that she would have to be They use the term destroyed, but I don't like that. She'd have to be put down. Word of that got back to her fellow Marines, and they didn't take kindly to that. So they broke into the office where she was being kept, the building that she was being kept in, and smuggled her out. She is officially promoted to staff sergeant upon arrival in the States. Had a ceremony and everything. Cake was served. Staff Sergeant Reckless, United States Marine Corps, stood at what the official photographs suggest was a pretty well attended ceremony, and a general actually pinned her rank to her blanket. So obviously all the Marines in attendance are thrilled that she now outranks some of them. But who wouldn't be happy to be outranked by a horse? That's fantastic. So then in a twist that nobody saw coming, Reckless got pregnant. From another horse, obviously. He's, in case there was any confusion. And the Marine Corps took this just as seriously as they would everything else. Like, to the point that they had a pregnancy watch. They had a billboard at one point for the pregnancy watch. The Marines and veterinarians monitored her around the clock, keeping an eye on her condition, making sure that she's healthy and she's safe, especially as she's getting closer to time to give birth. When Reckless went into labor, they literally woke everybody up so that they could be there to welcome their new Marine that's being born. The foal arrived. It was a colt named Fearless because, of course, and the wild part is this was such a thing on base that even the Marines that hadn't served with her in Korea, that had only known her since she was there, everybody was just as invested in this whole thing. It was apparently very emotional. We got dudes crying all over the place, hugging each other, slapping backs. And I mentioned the billboard, right? During the pregnancy, they announced the gender of the baby on a billboard. So somehow the Marine Corps did a gender reveal with less explosions than most civilians do. It's kind of weird how that works, where, they're usually more the we're going to blow shit up kind of people. And then you somehow have somebody in Nevada start a wildfire because they were doing a gender reveal. Over the years, she would actually have several foals, and the Marines watched over every single one of them. Reckless would die in 1968 at Camp Pendleton, California. She's buried on the base, and she was buried with full military honors because, she is a Marine. She is allotted that. There's a statue of her at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia, which was unveiled in 2013. There's also a statue of her at Camp Pendleton, and again, you know the drill. I've said it before with these. Some of the details in this may be a little wonky. They might not be right. The broader facts are 100% for certain. The 51 runs up and down the hill that one day, the wounds, the rank, the promotion ceremony, all the foals, the specific mechanics of how she got here from Korea, and the potential of them breaking her out of this whatever horse laboratory she was in. That stuff's a little fuzzy. Who really knows? What we do know is, like I said, the important stuff is true. 100% true. So we're going to move on to our last one. And this is the one that I found the absolute wildest and actually provided the opening quote for our show. Probably going to notice a pattern here. The United States Marine Corps have a specific and well-documented habit of adopting animals, giving them ranks, and then sending them into questionable situations. 1943, the 2nd Marine Division is in New Zealand training for whichever Pacific island they're about to invade, which is where we meet Sergeant Francis Pappy Fagan at a pub. There's a raffle. The prize at this raffle is a duck. Francis Fagin wins the duck. Whether this is luck or divine intervention, for the benefit of hilarious happening in the military, we don't know. What we do know, Fagin has the duck, and they are going to war. He names the duck Seawash after one of his buddies, Sergeant Jack Seawash Cornelius. He's from Washington, and apparently this nickname that was hung on him was kind of, I guess, considered a derogatory name for Native Americans from that particular area, which I'm assuming Jack Cornelius probably was. And, you know, it's the Marines. They're going to give each other shit about where they're from. It's just how it happens. Matter of fact, I have to find the quote because it's hilarious. So there's a quote from, he would actually become the first 4-star black general in the Marine Corps. His name was Daniel Chappie James, and he will get his own episode because I've done some reading on him. And this is him saying this, quote, "The Marines don't have any race problems. They treat everyone like they're black." I'd heard that quote before, and I'm like, it's hilarious because that quote is kind of the nice way to use that whole, one of the lines from the opening scene from Full Metal Jacket. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly which one I'm talking about. So Seawash would become the mascot of the 2nd Marine Division. She followed Fagin everywhere he went and developed a immediate taste for beer. Warm beer, specifically. She wouldn't touch like a draft or anything like that. It had to be like room temperature, which Fagin would go on to explain to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in 1944. Very like matter-of-fact delivery, according to the article. And he just explained to this newspaper man that the duck has a very particular taste when it comes to how the beer needs to be. I personally am not a warm beer guy. I think it's disgusting. Let's be honest, like, cold beer doesn't taste the best, but sometimes it really does. Now, more importantly than the beer, she made several amphibious landings, which is crazy because she's not an amphibian at all. But she was coming in on boats, specifically the like little Higgins boats, which my grandfather was actually in the Army during World War II, but he was attached to the Marine Corps as a driver, and unfortunately never got a chance to meet him. But my grandmother told me some stories about some of the stuff that he saw dropping guys off on beaches, which not good. So you like basically have to get to a certain point and swing it around and try to back up to the beach, and then when you're getting shot at, you can only go so far before you have to drop the gate. And guys would just go off the back, and they were weighed down with so much stuff that they would just sink, and they never came back up. Or like having to drive it from underneath down by the seat, basically, because his windshield was getting shot out, so he couldn't see where he was going. So not only is this duck making amphibious landings, someone had acquired a miniature Marine Corps style helmet. I don't know where, I don't know how, but they put this helmet on the duck. And to be clear, they took this deadly serious. Like, this duck is, it's hilarious that we stuck a tiny helmet on the duck. But she's part of the Marine Corps. Like, she needs to have equipment. Which is important because we're about to land on Tarawa, which the Battle of Tarawa was not great. It took place in 1943. It was one of the bloodiest engagements that the Marine Corps took part in during World War II. 18,000 Marines landed on Tarawa and fought against a heavily fortified Japanese position on a pretty flat coral island with nowhere to really move and nowhere to really hide. The Marines took nearly 1,000 casualties just in deaths in 76 hours of fighting. It's one of those battles where when you look at the casualty listings, it almost doesn't seem right because there's too many. Like, you're like, how did that many people die here? It was the Pacific. It was awful. And honestly, like I said before, fighting the Japanese, if you have three options to die, survive, or be captured, obviously, yeah, you want to pick survive. But if it comes down to die or be captured, probably better off just dying because they're not going to treat you well. That's another one we'll talk about next time. On the first day, with the Marines pinned down and having barely secured 70 yards of the beach, because they are under sustained machine gun fire, now's when shit gets serious. These guys are being shot at from pillboxes and bunkers from every direction. And then a rooster shows up. Take a second with that. There's men being shot and bleeding to death all over this beach. There's guys hiding, trying to reload, trying to fix a jammed rifle. And this rooster just walks out, just being all smug, like he owns the joint. Turns out, Seawash took offense to that. She took that personally. She goes straight after this thing. Runs directly into, from more than one account, the middle of where all this fighting is going on, and just starts going to town on this rooster. There's a citation that we're going to get to that would describe with, I couldn't imagine, okay? I couldn't imagine being the guy. You're a Marine. You're an officer. You're probably fairly high ranking because you're reading somebody's citation. And you have to be super straight-faced and serious when you read this out loud to people. Okay? So here's how the fighting goes first. The rooster apparently, when Seawash charged, pecked her in the head repeatedly, which technically counts as being wounded by an enemy combatant. She beat the dog shit out of this rooster and chased it off. Fagan told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch afterwards that the rooster didn't stand a chance. Seawash whipped him and chased him 30 feet up the beach. So she's now pursuing a retreating enemy. The Marines initially wanted to give her a Purple Heart for her head wounds, which unfortunately they settled for a citation for bravery instead. This is not real. This is not real. The citation was published in Life magazine on January 17th, 1944, and it reads as follows, quote, "For courageous action and wounds received on Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands, 1943, with utter disregard for his own personal safety," Seawash was a her, "upon reaching the beach without hesitation, engaged the enemy in fierce combat, namely one rooster of Japanese ancestry. And though wounded on the head by repeated pecks, she soon routed the opposition. She refused medical aid until all wounded members of her section had been taken care of." Again, the citation refers to Seawash as a he through the entire thing. She was a she, it would turn out. And it turns out that up to this point in time, the Marines had kind of thought that Seawash was a male duck. And then she laid an egg on Tarawa and kind of changed their minds about the whole thing. So Tarawa was not Seawash's only combat deployment. She was present for the Battle of Saipan, observing from a destroyer this time. So she storms the beaches at Tinian, and according to a Time magazine article in 1944, she, quote, personally captured a tiny Japanese duck, which, again, is going to raise some questions that nobody really ever got a chance to answer. There was, turns out, a Japanese duck on Tinian, and Seawash apparently did capture this thing. That's official record, so that's as far as we're going to go with that. So she comes home to a hero's welcome. She's making radio broadcast appearances. There was a lunch served in her honor. she was given all of the warm beer she wanted. She and Fagin traveled to She and Fagin traveled to promote war bond sales, which means that the United States government used a duck who had fought a rooster on a beach to sell war bonds. And it was apparently super effective, like enough so that they kept doing it. After the war, she retired to the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, where she lived until 1954, where she died of liver disease. So the Marines that knew her personally said that the liver disease had nothing to do with the beer. Her funeral was held at a taxidermy shop. Her body was stuffed and presented to the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia, where she still remains, with Reckless. So maybe this National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia is becoming a destination that I need to visit just to go see some cool stuff. I have to include this because it's too good not to. In 1980, at a retirement party, Fagin apparently confessed that Siwash might not have been quite as brave as he had originally let on. Of course, we're going to break this news 36 years later at a retirement party. His commitment to the story, and I, as someone who enjoys writing and like delivering and telling stories, I really kind of admire the fact that he stuck with us for so long. And the reason that the citation was so well detailed and so beautifully written is because apparently Pappy Fagin was, among other things, a very talented writer. I personally choose to believe that the rooster fight happened. I choose to believe that she chased him across the beach, and I think it's hilarious that this duck refused medical aid out of concern for other people. It's like, no, there's worse. Take care of them first, you know. But there is actual proof from the United States Marine Corps that the duck died of liver disease in 1954. Was it from the beer? Who knows? Did he foie gras himself? Possibly. There is still the citation for bravery, and Siwash remains in the museum for the National Museum for the Marine Corps. Man, I don't know if anybody's going to be upset that maybe some of this stuff isn't true. I just delivered the facts as I found them. I choose to believe that I told the whole truth through this whole thing. If I didn't, it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't done maliciously. But I just love awesome stories like that. And I wanted to share some fun stories because in the coming weeks, as we close out the season, we're down to our final 3 episodes after this. And they're all going to be fun. Because we've covered some real scumbags this year. Like we did a couple of Nazis and the Confederate general that started the Klan. You know, just not good people, right? So I wanted to end with some fun animal stories. And next week is a comedy of naval errors, which is going to be a hoot. And then, you know, I'll leave it up to the listeners. Let me know. Send me comments, like on this episode on Spotify or on YouTube or whatever, on Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month will get you access to everything that the network has to offer, and you get it early. Which means you're going to get History Goon early. You're going to get early access to Guestnicity with Luther. You're going to get early access to 911 calls with the operator. You're going to get early access to the Never Daily. Then you also get access to all the other shows that we have to offer. I'm gonna work my ass off here in the coming weeks to really try to get out some Patreon exclusive content for you guys, because you deserve it. You're paying the bills. You deserve some extra stuff, and I'm going to try to do that. they're probably not going to be the full-length episodes like this. It might be 15, 20 minutes of just a goofy story from history that I found. But I think you guys deserve it. Because, again, if you're on Patreon and you're paying for it, and you like what we're doing enough to give us money, you deserve a little extra. And if you want to support me directly as a creator, I have a Ko-Fi. It's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. Anything you want to donate there is greatly appreciated, but not expected. I've said before, I'm not going to sit here and panhandle on the internet. Hasn't come to that much yet, but who knows? Anyway, next week's going to be fun and hilarious. If you look up the term show in the dictionary, you're going to find a picture of this event that is about to take place. Until we meet again, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world. Just like all of these guys. Okay, love you. Bye.